Okay, I think we're on air. So welcome to the Special Olympics Australia webinar series. This is the Autism Inclusion in Sport and Recreation and Physical Education webinar series, and this is webinar 3, Communication and Inclusive Practice. I'm Sarah Whedon and I will be emceeing the webinar today. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands from which we meet today and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Today in our webinar, we will discuss strategies and provide you with resources to support communication between you and your athletes or students with autism. And we'll gain insight and perspective from Prue Stevenson around her experience of using sport and physical activity to manage and advocate for autism. And Prue has a very unique and creative approach, and I'm really looking forward to listening to her today. We'll also look at some inclusion modelling and highlight a program and case study from Tenpin Bowling Australia's National Junior Program, Bowl Patrol. So this is the third webinar in our Autism Inclusion series, and if you joined us for webinar 1, Understanding Autism, and webinar 2, Getting to Know Your Participants, welcome back. If you're joining us for the first time, a welcome also to you, and you can catch up on our previous webinars via the Special Olympics Australia online learning platform, SOA Learn. Here you'll find access to a recording of the webinar, the relevant resources supporting each webinar topic that you can download and keep, and a certificate of learning that some of you may need to support any professional development requirements. And this is the ongoing support we'll provide for all of our 6 webinars in the series, so you can access the materials for webinars 1 and 2 now. And you can find SOA Learn through the Special Olympics Australia website, or just type in SOA Learn in your preferred search engine to direct you there. I have mentioned this in our previous webinars, but while you are on SOA Learn, have a look at the range of other free resources we have available to support PE teachers, sport coaches and disability support workers to provide great PE and sport programs for people with intellectual disability and autism. And I will mention that in the past few weeks, we added to our product suite and have launched another fabulous resource in the Young Athlete Coach Accreditation course. And this is a unique coaching and teaching resource aimed at improving the physical literacy of athletes aged 18 and under with and without intellectual disability. So who is Special Olympics Australia? We're part of a global sporting community and inclusion movement which has been supporting and empowering people with intellectual disability for over 50 years. It was established by members of the famous American presidential family, the Kennedys, whose sister Rosemary Kennedy had an intellectual disability. In Australia, Special Olympics supports people with intellectual disability and autism through a number of sport, health, education and leadership programs. Offering 19 official sports, Special Olympics Australia provides year-round training as well as a competition at local, state, national and international levels. Now, some athletes join the community to have fun and make friends, while others are focused on winning and achieving medals. So the pinnacle of the Special Olympics competition ladder is the World Games, which is hosted on a 4-year cycle in both summer and winter sports. And here's a fun fact: Special Olympics is the only organisation authorised by the International Olympic Committee to use the word Olympics. I'd like to thank Sport and Recreation Victoria for their support in the webinar series, and this is Sport and Recreation Victoria's commitment to the Victorian Autism Plan, which seeks to provide greater opportunities and choice for people with autism to participate and contribute to the community, and it seeks to address the experience of exclusion faced by people with autism. And a special thank you to Prue Stevenson from Sport and Recreation Victoria for his unwavering support, wealth of knowledge and passion for inclusion, and Sean might chime in some of our chats throughout the webinar today. Sport and Recreation Victoria have also supported Special Olympics Australia in the development of an online learning module called An Introduction to Autism Spectrum Disorder. And I know many of you joining today have completed this module, so thank you, and we hope that you found that this has further enhanced your learning and supported you in autism inclusion. If you haven't completed the module, get online. This resource will not only help your learning, but by completing the module, you'll be also given the chance to shape and mould possible future learning modules. So there's an evaluation being conducted by Monash University. So if there's something in particular you'd like to see developed around autism inclusion in relation to, for example, your sport or your particular role, jump online and complete the module and provide the feedback. This module can be found on SOA Learn, and it's another free offering we have for you. So let's get into it. Some formal introductions of our panel. We have Kellie Tait to share both her personal experience as a mum of a child with autism and practical program delivery as the founder of AAA Sports Ballarat. Kellie has been a keynote speaker at the National Disability Sport Conference and is currently working with Cricket Victoria and AFL, providing grassroots sporting opportunities for children of all abilities. She is the 2018 AFL Blind Premiership winning coach of the Western Bulldogs and two-time Premiership team manager of Victorian Vikings cricket team. Kellie founded AAA Sports Ballarat in 2016 to provide a safe and inclusive sport participation environment for children of all abilities. And since then, Kellie has supported over 380 children in the AAA Sports Ballarat year-round sports program across 4 different sports, and she's won several awards for her programs. Next presenter, Emily Rennes, is the Sport Development and Programs Manager with Tenpin Bowling Australia, and Emily's career consists mainly of working for state and national sporting organisations in events and program management roles. And in her current role at Tenpin Bowling Australia, she's ensuring their national product is inclusive for everybody. Through partnerships with Special Olympics Australia, Vic Sport and Autism Spectrum Australia, she's been able to create resources for participants to utilise within the Tenpin Bowling Australia's national junior program, Bowl Patrol. Emily is passionate about sharing the benefits of being active with everybody, regardless of their ability. And our third presenter, but definitely not in the least, we're really pleased to have Prue Stevenson here with us today to present her lived experience and perspective around her engagement in sport and physical education. Prue is a practicing fine artist, having completed her Master of Fine Art at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, and she's an autistic consultant with Amaze and an ensemble member of Raucous Inclusive Theatre Group. Prue is wonderfully creative and uses performance art to both manage and advocate for autism. She's the founder of the project Stim Your Heart Out and has appeared on Dylan Alcott's Listen-Able podcast, as well as being featured on SBS's documentary Perspective Shift. Prue is a 3rd Dan black belt Taekwondo and has used this medium to self-regulate and a form of stimming in what she describes as a socially acceptable way. And Prue brought sport, art and autism expression through a fabulous installation at the Museum of Contemporary Art Australia through her work titled Expend. And this challenged her to strike the medium using a series of Taekwondo axe kicks, symbolising the excess energy expelled from your body and from her body. And this is a truly amazing piece of work, and you can see a picture of her in action on your screens. Prue has now taken up tap dancing, and she might tell you a bit more about her experience when she presents. So we really encourage your participation today and your learning, so please use the chat function to reach out to our panel and other members of the audience. If you have any questions, shoot it through on the Q&A button that should be appearing on your Zoom toolbar, which is likely down the bottom of your screen. We do have a dedicated section for Q&A at the end of the webinar, but send your questions through as you think of them. We need to remember that this is a safe space to ask questions which are conducive to your learning, so please go ahead and ask questions, but refrain from using any subject names or identifying language if you are providing situation or examples. So I will hand over to Kellie to start the presentation. Thanks, Kellie. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Sarah. I will just get my screen up for everybody. So bear with me for 2 seconds. There we are. Thanks, everyone, and welcome to webinar 3. I think we can all agree that the last 2 webinars have been really informative, and today won't be any different with Prue on board. So I look forward to you hearing your feedback about that later on today. In webinar 1, saw us explore what autism is and what challenges people might face when playing sport. And then in webinar 2, we looked at ways to understand why it's important to get to know our participants in order to create a more inclusive environment. Today's webinar will see us explore more communication styles for a person with autism and why inclusive practice is so important. So people with autism may have differences in both verbal and non-verbal communication. Many have a very literal understanding of language, and they often struggle to understand theory of mind. So in webinar 1, Kieran Thorpe talked about the Sally and Ann task and the tests that test for theory of mind in children with autism. Theory of mind reflects our ability to tune into others' thoughts. People with autism struggle to differentiate what is going on in another person's head and what's actually happening in the real world. It's not only thinking about what others are thinking, but it's also predicting other people's behaviours, their desires, their intentions, and their beliefs within that conversation. So this visual you can see on the screen right now is a really good indication of that. So the mum we can see here in the green t-shirt is on a phone call to see her daughter. And she says to her daughter, "What are you doing?" And her daughter says, "I'm playing with this." Now you and I would know that the mother can't see what the daughter's playing with. So that doesn't make any sense to her. The mother's next words would quite possibly be, "What are you playing with? I can't see what you have." This is a good example of theory of mind. A person with autism may not be able to understand that who they're talking to on the phone can't see what they're doing. So the conversation, doesn't make sense to them. When we talk about non-verbal communication, there can be lack of eye contact. This isn't always the case. Some people with autism are okay with making eye contact, but it is a fairly common trait. If someone isn't making eye contact with you, this does not mean that they're not listening to you. And I really want to emphasize that. It doesn't mean that they're not listening to you. They're still listening. They're still taking in everything that you're saying. They're just not making that visual eye contact with you. When they may have trouble understanding body language, struggling to read other people's body language. They may have trouble with gestures and facial expressions. If you cannot read a facial expression, it could lead to social interactions that aren't beneficial. And I think we can all agree with that. When we talk about verbal communication, that back and forth conversation between people can be really difficult for a person with autism. Echolalia, so the mimicking of phrases that they may have seen on TV or that they may hear at home and repeatedly using that over and over again is very common. They may only like to talk about their restricted interests, and if you start to talk about something that's of interest to you, you might lose them in that conversation because that's not what interests them. They may have difficulty with small talk and banter, and sarcasm has no place in a conversation with someone with autism. They just don't understand sarcasm, so it's best to leave that out. Your tone of voice, so you may be showing lots of despair in the tone of your voice, but they may be reading something completely different from that. They have a very literal interpretation of language, and I think Prue's going to speak to this a little bit later on, but they may find things very black and white. And they may struggle with empathy, and not all people with autism struggle with empathy, but some really do struggle to empathise with other people. So make sure when you're in a social communication setting with someone with autism that you're checking for understanding from them. Use language that's really clear and precise and concrete. When it comes to eye contact, don't worry if they're not making eye contact with you. It doesn't mean that they're not listening. Allow them processing time. Allow that 6-second rule where if they're not quite processing it, you may need to reword it or just offer it to them again. Ask for their preferred way of communicating. They might have a way that really works for them. So if you ask them, they'll be more than happy to share that information with you. And don't use metaphors and sarcasm. Use visuals to back up your verbal instructions. So we'll talk about visuals a little bit later, but whiteboards in your classes, visual aids, that sort of thing are really helpful when trying to back up what it is you want them to achieve. When you're in a group setting, make sure you use a person's name to gain their attention instead of eye contact. Don't force their participation. Allow them to participate at their own level. Adapt a staggered approach when integrating them into larger groups. And start with one-on-one. Use of a support worker or a volunteer or even a buddy is a great way to get someone started. Social skills groups, either within school or outside of school, are a great and safe environment for a person with autism to learn and practice these skills that will help them in a sports setting. And social stories and comic strip conversations are also helpful when learning about group settings. When talking about restricted and repetitive behaviours, don't make promises and make sure you follow through with your rewards. Prepare for change, so make sure that they know if there's going to be a change in the routine, that they've been told about that ahead of schedule. Use first and then visuals to help with this as well. Explore the environment at a quieter time means bringing the participant into the sporting environment when no one else is there. Have a one-on-one session with them, introduce them to the environment, and give them an opportunity to feel comfortable there first before bringing in everything else. Structure the environment with really clear boundaries, set rules, signs on the walls of your sporting complex that you can refer back to during the session so that they know what's expected of them. Visual timetables and social stories will also help with this, and consistent structure doesn't mean doing the same activity every time. It just means making sure that you prepare them if there's going to be a change. So in today's resource section, we're going to pop a resource called What's Hiding Behind the Misbehaviours, and this is from Social Skills Plus. This is a great document that will give us some insight into the behaviours that we might see within our programs that may not be misbehaviour, that it may be something else is going on for this person. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the sensitive child. So what you might see with a sensitive child is someone who cries and sulks over the smallest things. They get sad when you leave the room. They need to know where you are at all times, and they're overly empathetic to other people's emotions and even to movie characters. What really might be going on for a child that's like this in your program is that they lack self-regulation. They might be worried about new things and need help to gradually be introduced to them. And they may have an inner fear that they're unable to verbalise. When you see a child that's really angry in your program, they might be yelling and screaming, throwing things and is really destructive, crossing their arms and shutting down, shouting out, "I hate you, go away, you're not the boss of me." What really might be going on for a child like this is anxiety. Anxiety can often appear as anger. They probably don't have the appropriate coping strategies, and they probably need some help with calming strategies to get them through. They may be worried about these unknown feelings of anxiety. So coming up with a plan to help them with calming strategies and finding out what it is that might be causing this anxiety would be really beneficial. When we talk about the perfectionist, might be somebody who's really nervous about breaking the rules, doesn't like to get things wrong, who's really scared of answering a question incorrectly, and who struggles with constructive criticism and needs to control every situation. And I think we've probably all had someone like this in our program at one point or another. Struggling with that, what really might be going on with them is that they could be struggling with really negative thought patterns about themselves. They may need help to connect their thoughts and their actions. And you can do this using comic strip conversations, that sort of thing. They may have trouble verbalizing their worries. and they may thrive on doing things the right way. When we talk about someone who's really shy, they might be hiding behind your legs, scared of new people, don't like to go to new places, really fearful of change. They prefer playing and hanging out with familiar friends, and may struggle with personal space, so they may not want to be too close to the group. What really might be going on for this child is that they're unable to verbalise their worries and fears, that they're really cautious of trying new things, not being able to control the situation that they're in. So having a visual timetable and schedule might help a child like this to know what's coming up next and what to expect. Social stories can also help to navigate these new situations. And last of all, the overexcited child, which I think we've all seen at one point or another. That's the child that becomes really hyper when guests come over, says inappropriate things and jokes around, can't keep still. Their personal space is way too close. They have no sense of personal space. They play rough. They have limited self-control and no idea how to stop, even when prompted to do so. So what really might be going on for this child is that they're unable to anticipate or control a situation. They may feel out of control in that situation. They've got no social understanding of the situation, so no theory of mind going on there. And they may be trying to expel a lot of really nervous energy and unsure how to do that. And so it manifests itself this way. They may be seeking tactile grounding, so fidgets and sensory stimulation could be added into your programs at this point. So when building social skills in sport, try to choose a goal that's achievable. Do things like a small bounce while on their knees first. Set them up for success. Then once they've done that, progress to them standing up and doing the bounce. We really want them to feel successful. It's so important that we make the goals achievable. Keep rewards consistent amongst all participants so that nobody feels left out, and use really simple language. Transition participants from a support worker to a buddy really gradually. So if it takes 3 weeks of someone working one-on-one, then it takes 3 weeks, and just transition them really gradually. Use visual guides on the ground to respect personal space. So in my program, I use little visual dots. I have one at the start of the activity. I have one at the end of the activity. If we have fielding positions that I need them to be in, I use the dots there. So, make it really clear what's expected. Use a buddy system with children of similar ability or similar interests. And something else that I've done when I've been working in schools is to use a buddy system with some older children who might be in a leadership sort of role within the school environment, who could come into the PE class or into the after school sport class and to be that buddy for the child with autism and give them some extra support. Encourage them all to contribute to what the activity might look like. Give them some power in that. What are we going to do today and how is it going to look? Allocate special roles for the participants so that it's clear what's expected of them, and don't force interaction with other participants. Playing alongside each other is still a really successful session, and we need to remember that. Set out rules early and reinforce them continually throughout the session. If a participant challenges you, give them 2 choices. Make the choice you want them to do the more desirable one, and use your hands as a visual prompt. So on the right hand, you can do 5 minutes of soccer, or you can do 20 minutes of cricket. When the desired behaviour is achieved, make sure you reinforce it by telling them exactly what they've done correctly. I loved the way you did 5 minutes of soccer with me and you kicked that ball so far. Never take a reward away for poor behaviour. Usually there's something behind the poor behaviour. So let's find out what's hiding behind that behaviour, and let's adjust that for the next session rather than taking away rewards for what they were trying to achieve. Remember, always be firm but fair, always be kind and consistent, and mould and demonstrate. Demonstration for these visual learners is so important. So, have a whiteboard, have visual aids, or physically show them how you want them to achieve the skill is going to be far more beneficial than just standing at the front talking instructions towards them. I'm going to hand the reins over to the amazing Prue Stevenson and let her talk you through a bit more in depth about the things that I've just discussed. Thanks, Prue.
You're 4 minutes ahead of time.
Oh, you keeping me on a schedule, Prue.
All right, so hi, my name's Prue Stevenson and I'm an autistic person. I prefer identity first language, mainly because autism, it's in my brain. I've had it since the second trimester of my mum's pregnancy. So when I was in my mum's womb, I was autistic and I still am. And it's not something that I can just take away, or it's not something that I have like a cold and I'll get over it. I'll always be autistic, and I love being autistic because there are certain things that my brain can do that other brains can't do as well. So that's my identity language. Next, what's my next one? Yes, so I just want to acknowledge that there is two types of languages when we look at autism. There's medical language, which is quite deficit, and then there's lived experience language. And it's really good when you're working with autistic people to get to know that lived experience language as well as the medical language, because that's the more neutral and empowering language. And some examples I have of that I've made up is with things like sensory processing disorder. I like to use the term a widened sensory perception because it's more neutral. And with restricted thinking, an extended detailed focus. And that extended detailed focus is something that can be a really big strength when it comes to practicing sport. So, where am I? Yes, and I also want to acknowledge that autistic people, they're not, we're not just like, there's a set of autistic people over here that are low functioning and they will always be like that, and a set of autistic people over here that are high functioning. I really like to think away from those ideas of functioning, because it's very variable. And you think of yourself as an individual and go, well, I only got 4 hours sleep last night, so I'm not functioning as well as I did yesterday, or I forgot to eat. So it's things like that. It's just part of being human. It's just that autistic people have a lot more neural pathways going up in their head. So there's a lot more that when our brains get overworked, which we tend to be working 5 times harder than a non-autistic person, it can get overloaded more often. So on to meltdowns and shutdowns. I experience meltdowns very often. I would say, at the moment with lockdown, it's actually a lot less because my life has become a lot simpler. But when it's not lockdown, I tend to have at least 1 meltdown a week at the very least, sometimes more. And shutdowns as well are something that they're basically the same thing. It's when my brain gets overloaded and it shuts down, kind of like a computer when it gets a bit clunky, and then the computer shuts down and reboots up. So that shutdowns are more inward, so the person might be non-responsive, they might not be blinking, or they might have their eyes closed. I tend to just lay on the floor wherever I am and just give my brain that downtime. When I have a meltdown, I cry a lot, I'm self-regulating a lot, so lots of stimming, and I struggle to use my rational thought. So what am I up to now? Yeah, so intersensory. So I think the next conference series is about sensory, and with sensory, so there's hyper, so over responsive, and hypo, which is under responsive, and that hypo isn't as well known and as talked about as much as the over responsive. So I'm really hypersensitive to smell and sound, and sometimes touch, sometimes light. Never natural light. Natural light's always good, but it's more the man-made fluorescent lights that I struggle with. And so there can be a few barriers around that. For example, when I played soccer, we always had oranges, and luckily we had those oranges outside because it was outside soccer. But if it was an indoor sport, that's where I would have a really big barrier to access that environment because the smell is too high-pitched for me. And even things like apple juice, the really sugary type, can make my brain shut down immediately. And it's something that I can't control. That's where the environment needs to really kind of adjust for my needs, because I don't have nose plugs that can stop myself from smelling. And then on to stimming. Oh, so with sensory also, I'm very under responsive with my vestibular sense, which is a sense of balance in my inner ear. So I love rocking and spinning around and jumping up and down. So I'm a real movement person, and again, that's why I think I've really gone into sport, and I love, and I get a lot of my positive sensory input and expression through sport. So I'm much less likely for my brain to shut down during the week when I'm doing other things like studying and working, if I've done sport during the week. With stimming, so the stimming is the repetitive movement autistic people do. There are many reasons why we do it. It's very important to our mental health as a community. I like to think of it as our cultural dance, and it is where I can look at the senses that I'm under responsive to and get that positive sensory input. So say there's a smell like apple juice, for example, and that's making my brain shut down or begin to shut down, then I might start flapping my hands because that's something that feels good to me, and I can focus on that sensory input, and that will help me get that positive thing to focus on away from what's really causing me a lot of pain. And then I can be in that environment longer. There are many other reasons to stim, like expressing emotion and that kind of thing. And it's really important for autistic people to learn the difference between safe self-regulation and self-regulation that's not safe for them and others. For example, I've done a lot of head banging in my time. So banging my head, and that again is because I love that sense of balance. I love movement, and it gives me a positive input, but it's not good for my body. So learning other strategies of how I can maybe, like there's a guy at my local gym, and he's an autistic adult, I can just tell. And he just comes to the gym and sits on a yoga ball and bounces up and down the whole time. And that's great. So he's obviously a vestibular seeker too. Also, I'd like to kind of say that for me, my joints are very hypermobile. So when I do sport, I need to be quite careful because there are certain things with sport where I can, particularly around stretching, where I can push my body too far and cause injuries. So I believe that autistic people are much at a much higher risk of having hypermobile joints. So that's just something to be aware of. Oh, and also with back to meltdowns and shutdowns, what to do when an autistic person is having a meltdown and shutdown. Basically, the brain, it can't take on any more information. And so even if you speak to that person or touch that person, that's giving their brain more things to process. And thinking about things like empathy, autistic people have so much more empathy than the average person. And it's a really old kind of common misconception that autistic people don't feel empathy. And one thing that I experience is other people's emotions at a much heightened level. And sometimes I can't tell if what I'm feeling is my emotion or somebody else's emotion. So yeah, when I have a meltdown, I'm more susceptible to feeling other people's emotions and pushing through the meltdown to support others who feel very uncomfortable when I have very autistic behaviours. So just something to be aware of, to just, stay calm, make sure that person's in a safe place. And if, say, they have a meltdown and it's disrupted the whole class and they've had it in the middle of a basketball court, in that moment, don't expect them to use their rational thought and understand what you're saying. But maybe next week, or when they're calmed down and their brain is starting to be able to function better, that's when you start to give those strategies of, next time you feel overwhelmed, you can go sit over there, and you're welcome to go and have that downtime whenever you want. So you're setting up an invitation, and you say, when you feel ready, you're welcome to join in. You can just give me a nod or wave to me, or just join in the game and start again. So there are no consequences to that behavior, and they have a strategy around what to do when that happens, so then it doesn't escalate into a panic attack. Where am I up to? Number 4. Oh yeah, so expressive communication and receptive communication. So I'm very good at expressive communication. I don't know if you can tell, but I love to talk and I'm very good at it. 80% of the time. When my brain shuts down, completely nonverbal. But most of the time, very good at expressing how I'm feeling, what's going on, that kind of thing. However, my receptive communication, so taking on what other people, what other information, that is nowhere near as good. So I have many more I need more support when it comes to taking on information from others. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. Echolalia. So echolalia, there are many different ways why autistic people use echolalia. A common one is, I don't know what response to give to this question, so I'm going to refer to a movie I watched, or, something that I know. Mine as a kid was always a Shirley Temple movie. So nobody knew what I was talking about unless I was at a retirement home. But another reason is to stim, so to self-regulate. They might, something like Countdown Ladies, sing this song, doo-dah, doo-dah, feels really, really good. So they might repeat something that feels good. And another reason is to bide time. And that's what I use echolalia for the most. So if I am given an instruction and I start repeating that, I usually whisper that over and over again, and that's to support my working memory. Because non-autistic people, like the average neurotype, they can hold, 5 to 9 things in their working memory. That's your superpower right there. Autistic people, it's 1 to 3, or I would even go as far to say 0 to 3 things in their working memory. So it's things like you're reading a menu and you look at item number 1, you put that in your head. Item number 2, put that in your head. And you do that 5 to 9 times. And then you make a choice of what you want to eat at that restaurant. Whereas autistic people, we can't hold that many things up in there and keep them in a short, that's our like a short-term memory. So completely lost my point. It's gone. Part of being autistic, sometimes you just go off and you forget what you're talking about. With theory of mind, one thing that I find really challenging, particularly in sport, is I can't tell the difference between friendly banter and bullying. So that's where I need someone, a support person, to come in and actually let me know, Prue, those people aren't your friends. They're bullying you, and that's why your brain keeps shutting down, or that's why you're really tired when you get home, because those social skills, they're not actually being kind to you. Whereas other things, it might be that these people are having a joke around and it's friendly and it's not harmful. So just learning what the differences, they look very similar. So it's good to just have people around to kind of work those things out, help you, support you to work that out. My notes are very small. So high level and figurative language. So high level and figurative language are things like idioms. So things like my mum always used to say, hop in the shower. So I used to hop in the shower thinking, Mum, you're being very dangerous right now, but I'll do it. Take a chair. So you might find an autistic person will pick a chair up and take it home because you said they could take it. And this is where autistic people can get in a lot of trouble. It is a walking comedy festival, but it's also something that gets us in a lot of trouble. So these are things that these idioms and sayings, it's something to be really aware of, because non-autistic people use it and it's like muscle memory, verbal memory. It just comes out and you don't even know that you're saying things that don't make logical sense. And it's actually putting the pressure on the listener to understand what you're saying. Things like sarcasm, it's the same thing. You're putting the pressure on the listener to understand what you're saying. I'm over here. Oh yeah, so different sports that I've played. One thing, my family are all A-grade tennis players, so I'm not. I don't even know how to score in tennis. I shared that with Dylan Alcott. Yes, and so with tennis, I used to go with my family and we'd play, and I didn't understand the game, and I would get very frustrated and angry, and I'd grab the ball and then I'd run off with the ball, and then we were playing chasey, and I know how to play chasey, so then I was having a great time. My family, not so much. Netball, I tried netball because Mum was really into netball and basketball and squash, so I tried a few of her sports, and I got bullied in netball, had no idea. Mum worked it out and I got pulled out, so that was short-lived. Basketball, again, I didn't understand the game. I just knew the point was to get the ball, so I got the ball and I didn't know who was on my team, or I didn't even know that there were 2 teams, I don't think. And so I just got the ball and passed it to the next person because that's what you do. And yes, my teammates were not happy with me that day. With soccer, I played soccer before I did taekwondo, and that was really great. But I mainly played one position, which was either sweeper or left defense. I loved left defense. And that is because I could see the whole game and I could process the whole game. And my job was quite simple: keep the ball away from the goals. So I was in a lot of control in that position, so that worked well for me. And with swimming, I used to do swimming with my brother, and he loved winning. He was very competitive, still is. So he would look like an underwater helicopter and win a race. Whereas I had perfect technique. I would not leave a splash on that swimming pool, and I would come in last or fourth often, and it didn't really faze me because it was all about that technique and, again, that attention to detail. So this is where Taekwondo really suits me, because it is very detailed in terms of its technique. It's also very structured and disciplined, and I just thrive in structure because I know exactly what's expected of me, what my position is, and I learn the social skills, and all that is embedded in the sport. So it's really great. I've also found dance really inclusive. Actually, I've found dance a lot more inclusive than sport. And I've gone more towards that recently. And you look at ballet, and that's like a martial art in itself. There's so much discipline. I think they get the same injuries as an Olympic Taekwondo athlete. Wouldn't be surprised. What am I up to? Oh, yeah. So losing. I think that losing is something that really needs to be taught in sport, because when the goal is always to win and then you don't win, then what do? You have all these emotions, you have all that adrenaline, and adrenaline is something that's so, it's in your whole body. And how do you regulate that adrenaline rush that you get in sport in a way that's safe for you and safe for others and appropriate? That's a lot to ask for a person. So learning, maybe having a few games where the goal is to lose, and then knowing like what's expected. When you lose, do you shake hands and say, good job, that was a great game, great rally? So just practicing that kind of thing. And I have a colleague at Amaze who has done this, and she's had a lot of success around that. Also, another thing is with not getting a partner. So when the coach says, okay, everybody partner up in groups of 2, I usually don't get picked. In fact, I can't remember when I ever got chosen as a partner, but it's like, what do you do when you don't have a partner? Is there so that people aren't getting stressed in that idea of, oh, I didn't get chosen. That's one thing to work out emotionally, but then what's expected of me? Can I do the next part of this sport when I don't have a partner? Also, rules. So rules are something autistic people love. Rules. We love rules. It creates a lot of structure. But the thing with rules is that sometimes rules can contradict each other. And that's where a lot of the time I find I get stuck. So if somebody's teaching me a rule that contradicts something my parents have taught me, or something you said 5 minutes ago, your autistic students will let you know, and it'll be probably it could be a very small thing, it could be a very big thing, but it's important to take that on board and kind of address that, because it's good for autistic people to learn how to stretch their brains and have flexible ways of thinking, but it's also good to be your word. And that, I think that was everything. Over to you, Kellie. Over to you, Kellie.
Here I am. Thanks, Prue. A little delayed there. Thanks, Prue. I'll just reshare my screen. I think we can all agree that Prue is so engaging and articulate and just amazing to listen to. So thank you, Prue. And by the comments that are coming through the chat there, everyone just found that so beneficial. So
Oh,
thank you
one
so
more
much.
thing.
Oh,
I
yes.
just remembered, if there was anything that you thought of, like questions you want to ask when I was speaking or anybody is speaking, just make a little note of it, and then we're going to have a Q&A panel at the end of this, and we look forward. We love your questions.
There was one, Prue, for you about your oranges, actually, and the smell. So we will talk about that in the Q&A, if that's all right. Okay, so, and I loved, actually, you calling your stimming a cultural dance. I absolutely love that. So I will be sure that's exactly what it's like for my son. Okay, so also in the resources section for this webinar, there are some copies of the visual aids that I use in my program at AAA Sports Ballarat. So I'm going to run through those with you now. So the first one is a social story. So for people who aren't familiar with visual aids, as Prue mentioned, they can be really beneficial. So a social story is a short description of a particular situation, event, or activity. It can be used to prepare for an event or to teach consequences of someone's actions. Social stories can help a person with autism to understand how and why certain situations occur. So you can see the visual on the screen at the moment is a social story that I use in my program for children who are having trouble learning how to wait their turn. And it goes, playing games with other people can be fun. When we play games, we all wait our turn. Sometimes I get to go first, and I like going first. But I remember that sometimes other people like to go first too. Sometimes I'm waiting for everyone else to have a go, and then it's going to be my turn, and this is okay. We all have a go at being first. Playing games with other people is fun. So just reinforcing the skill that we want them to have. Another thing is a comic strip conversation. Now, my son hates social stories, will not have a bar of social stories. If I put a social story near him, he rolls his eyes into the back of his head. But if we do a comic strip conversation, he's far more engaged with that. So just be mindful that social stories may not work for everyone, but maybe a comic strip conversation might. So there's other options as well if you want to try something different. So comic strip conversations are designed to show what is actually being said in a conversation, how people might be feeling and what people might be thinking during that conversation. Being able to see the elements of a conversation, the thoughts, the words and the facial expressions helps participants to recognise others' feelings and explore their theory of mind. So you'll see here, one person is saying out loud, "Pass it to me." And the other person's thinking in their head, "He's rubbish at catching." And then he says out loud, "I'm not throwing it to you, you're rubbish." And then that person's thinking in their head, "I'm really upset, I just wanted to try." So it just puts into context what's happening in that situation for both people that are part of it. The first and then is one of my favourite visuals to use in programs. First and then is used to help a person achieve a certain task. So the first thing is always the action that you want them to complete, and the then is the participant's preferred option. First and then sets a clear expectation with a motivator as a reward, and can work really well for kids that are drawn by motivation. A choice board is another great one for group programs. It offers the participant an option of which activities they'd like to do. The choice board offers the participant the opportunity to be involved in their learning and to choose which order they will do that learning in, therefore increasing their chance of participation. Choice boards can also be helpful for participants if they are non-verbal. Visual timetables are a great tool, I think especially in schools, but also in programs outside of school. It's a series of images that represent a sequence of events. The visual timetable will offer predictability and structure to a person with autism. Visual schedules are designed to help participants to reach their goals by following the visual schedule step by step. So they'll know exactly what's coming up next, how much time they have to do that activity for. And the last one is the visual timer. These are invaluable, I believe, in a sporting context, especially with younger children. Visual timers are great for people who have trouble with transitions. They tell the participant how long and when they're going to have to do an activity. They allow you to pre-warn the participant of an activity, that it will be starting or that it will be finishing. And they also help to answer continued questions like what's going to happen next, what time will we be doing it, and how long will we be doing it for. This can be really helpful in reducing people's anxiety. So the power of inclusion. If we're all inclusive, it allows people the opportunity to be part of a sporting community. It allows people to be able to participate at an appropriate level to them. It allows them to be able to participate with appropriate support for them. It allows them to be embraced by sport and to feel welcomed. And it allows them the opportunity to be social and to make new friends. And it also gives them the opportunity to live a health and active lifestyle, which should be a right for all of us. The inclusion spectrum is designed to include people with disabilities in sport. It offers an activity-centred approach to inclusion and provides opportunities for everyone to participate. So the inclusion spectrum has so many elements that means that anybody with any degree of ability can be included. So it may be that somebody comes into a program with a disability and they don't need any modifications made at all to that program. They may come into the program and they may need some minor modifications made to be able to participate. They may come into the program and need some major modifications to be able to participate. And that's probably more where we head into, you know, it might be a program for people just with a disability, and it might be a program that runs alongside your normal programs. There's also the opportunity for people without a disability to play disability sport, like wheelchair football. And there's also the opportunity for people with a disability to be part of non-playing roles in a sporting environment. So coaching, umpiring, water duties, whatever. There's so many roles we could include people into. These are all things that are really important to making someone feel part of the team. I'm going to hand over now to Emily from Tenpin Bowling Australia. They have an amazing program that they have set up for people with autism, and she's going to run us through a bit of a case study about what that looks like.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Hi, everyone. Just popping my slides on share as well. Thank you very much for including Tenpin Bowling in the presentation today. We're pretty lucky in the sense that bowling is already fairly inclusive, but I guess today I'm going to speak specifically about our national junior participation program, which is called Bowl Patrol. And I think the best way to explain Bowl Patrol is to show you the video. So hopefully this will work for you as well. So that's Bowl Patrol, and it's essentially how we teach kids to bowl. Really, we've sort of been world first in putting the program together, in putting carpets over the top of the lanes, so that the kids can walk down 9 meters closer to the pins and learn how to deliver the ball. So it's been a very groundbreaking but fantastic way to break the sport down to the point where it's much easier to enjoy learning how to bowl rather than bowling all those gutter balls, learning the hard way. So as part of Bowl Patrol, we happened to just organically notice that kids who identified with having autism were flocking towards the program. We saw it in sporting schools, that we have a lot of special schools really keen. And we've also seen just in general play from day to day, the popularity of Tenpin bowling and learning how to bowl. So at the end of every term, we do ask our participants, what did you like about the program? And some of the things that they pick out, I've listed here, just to give you a bit of an indication or a highlight of why Bowl Patrol seems to be quite popular with this demographic. So first and foremost, we have really clear curriculum with 8 sessions. We have a lesson plan for every session that is very detailed and has sort of consistent structure. So we always have a warm-up, we always learn a new skill, we have time to practice that new skill, and then we have game time. And that structure remains with the duration of the program. So all 8 sessions are like that. So there's predictability in the routine. They know when they come to the centre that this is how the program will run every week and every session. Try and encourage our centres to keep the kids on the same lanes, modifying the environment where we can. It's independent play. So we know sometimes team sports can be quite challenging. There's that communication aspect that makes it a little bit more difficult to work out how to play the sport. But luckily in Tenpin bowling, it's pretty much just yourself, playing against yourself. And particularly with Bowl Patrol, we don't pitch the kids against each other. It's always just about self-progression and being the best bowler you can by yourself. So that's that independent play element. There are fewer variables. You're not trying to catch a ball or pass it to anyone. It's all about your delivery and your execution of the sport. There's lots of learning, lots of new skills, lots of newness in general when you start any sport at any age, regardless of your ability. We do really strongly focus on reward for improvement, and that comes in a variety of ways. We have coloured wristbands when you get to the score on the carpet that you're on. The next week you go to the shorter carpet, but you've got the wristband to prove that you've achieved that already. Lots of high fives, usually high fives. It'll probably now be Wi-Fi high fives from a distance with COVID throwing in some challenges there. Loads of positive feedback. Even if the ball's going into the gutter, we're still saying that's a really good effort, good on you for having a try, better luck next time type thing. We also in Tenpin bowling have the capacity to modify and adapt our environment, so we can luckily sort of turn up the lights or turn down the lights or stop the arcade games, turn the music down. We're very lucky to be able to modify the environment, which is something that our participants enjoy, and it's fun. Kids love bowling. They often associate bowling with birthday parties, school holidays, and fun family times. So we're very fortunate in that element. But we did notice that there was probably still some gaps. We were really keen to ensure that kids with autism or without autism really enjoyed the learning experience and the program itself. So we thought, how can we find out what additional resources these kids need? And this is probably the message for you, for coaches and teachers and for parents as well. Don't feel like you have to do it alone. Like, reach out to the organisations that are already out there that have this knowledge. Tenpin Bowling Australia did not have this knowledge. We didn't know that people with disabilities enjoyed our sport, but we didn't really understand what was important and integral when they're learning how to bowl. So we partnered with people like Autism Spectrum Australia, Special Olympics Australia, some of our state sporting organisations, particularly Vic Sport, and Sarah's going to share a report that Vic Sport did with us after we tested some of the resources I'm about to share with you. And Amaze as well, of course. So find the people around you, find your community, find your tribe, and partner with them to get the knowledge that you need. And they were really integral in helping us to make this program a little bit better. It was already good, it was already enjoyable, but we wanted it to be a little bit more. So as an outcome of that research and that partnership and that testing, we worked out that there was a couple more resources that would really help our participants in the learning to bowl experience. But it essentially came back to the experience as a pathway. So we think, you know, when we're learning a new sport or trying something new for the first time, it is scary. Again, and there are additional sort of threats for people with challenges. Like, what if I can't do it? And what if I don't understand? And what if I need a timeout? And who's going to help me through this experience? So we've created all these resources to make sure that those fears are kind of eliminated, really, or at least really brought down to a minimal level. So it's a more positive experience, a more enjoyable experience, and they want to keep coming back and bowling. So we've got things like, you can prepare at home. You can jump online, have a look at the centre, have a look at the program. We have all of our session plans and resources online as well at bowlpatrol.com.au. You can watch the social story. You can take a visit to the centre before you start the program, so a bit of a familiar or a bit of a tour. We really like to try and connect you with your coach. We actually encourage, and I know this is not possible for every sport, but we encourage our parents or our support workers to stay with our participants. So this Bowl Patrol is primarily targeted at primary school age, so we're looking at sort of kinder prep through to year 6. So we're more than happy to have our support workers there and to share our resources with them so they can pass it on. And of course, practicing. So if you can practice some bowling at home, and we've got some activities online that kids can have a go at before they come in the centre, because it is quite confronting. We want them to come into the centre knowing that they're supported, that there's going to be good instruction, that help's available if they need it, there's time out space, and try and turn it into a really positive experience. So if I practice, I might improve. I might get really good at this. So just, I guess, a bit more information on the resources specifically that might help you or your participants for bowling, and as an outcome of the partnership. The social story. So again, as Kellie had mentioned, it doesn't work for everyone. It might work for some people and not for others, but the social story is a sort of, you know, what to expect when you go Tenpin bowling for the first time, or when you do Bowl Patrol for the first time. So what's going to happen when I walk in the centre? Who's the coach? What do I do if I need help? How is the session going to run? What happens at the end? How do we transit from activity to activity? So it becomes really obvious, and the anxieties and the fears start to alleviate because you're more confident with what's going to happen, more relaxed, able to enjoy it. We've done a word board as well. So we know in a lot of our sports and a lot of activities, there's very specific language, a lot of new language. So we just grabbed a whole heap of words, and we've put them on a board with some images, and at the back of the bottom of the board, there's a couple of empty spaces, because we know kids will find their own words that they don't know yet, or they need to learn, or that are going to be specific to their experience. That will help get them through that as well. These resources, by the way, are all free and publicly available on our Bowl Patrol website. So I've just put the link there, but I'm sure Sarah will share after. It's under participants, so you can jump on and grab a look. The other 2 additional resources I wanted to touch on quickly was the visual schedule. So again, we've had a bit of reference of that. So these are literally just half A4 cards, and we encourage our lane rangers, or our coaches, or our support workers, or our parents, whoever's using the cards, to use these visual schedules as a way to move through the program. So now we're doing an activity, now we're having game time, and there's just a simple illustration that helps guide and understand that activity. Tips for parents as well. Some examples of how these are being used. So you can see one of our coaches in the middle there. We're really open about our resources. They're out during the session. As I said, parents and support workers can access them. The kids can access them themselves. It's not something that's out of their reach. We can have the familiar, as we've said, sort of before the program. We are able to get these resources to the participants before the program. So having this stuff in advance of actually experiencing the learning or the first session is really valuable. We do a lot of sharing through our social networks as well. So Facebook and Instagram, we find very handy for reaching out to networks and sharing resources and getting feedback on those sorts of things as well. Before I hand back, just a little touch on NDIS, and again, by no means are we any sort of authority or a knowledgeable source on this, but we have seen once or twice this junior program included in the plans of some of our participants. So talk to your service providers or local area coordinators about that possibility, but definitely modified sport, we all, I think, share the opinion that it's a very valuable resource for all participants. We are very excited to announce that we have put our Lane Ranger training online. So Lane Rangers is what we call our coaches for Bowl Patrol. And courtesy of COVID-19, we've had a little bit of time to pop all of that online. It's also a free resource at the moment. And you can jump online to the Bowl Patrol website and find the Lane Ranger page and take yourself through the training. It's a series of text, some videos, and then a quiz at the end. So hopefully that's really easy and accessible. We can share the link for you, but you can learn a lot more about teaching bowling and Bowl Patrol by becoming a Lane Ranger. And that was it. As we've previously mentioned, there'll be Q&A at the end, so feel free to pop through a question if you need or if you like. But now I'm going to hand back to Kellie. Thank you.
Awesome. I think we're handing back to Sarah, actually.
Right, we're handed back. So what wonderful presentations today. I've been sitting here completely mesmerised by everyone's information. So yeah, I've learned a lot just in this last hour. So I will get every panellist to have their microphone and their camera on, because it's now time to answer a lot of the questions that have come through. So let's get into it. I'm just a bit mindful of the time. We do have a lot of questions coming through. This one has come up probably quite significantly within our audience today. So, and Prue, as Kellie reiterated, that there was a lot of questions coming in for you, but also a lot of positive feedback about your presentation, about the information that you've been able to provide our audience. So congratulations for being able to pass that information on. There is a question from Jessica Scannell from Welcoming Australia, and she says that she encounters children with autism who can sometimes become obsessed with making sure other participants are following the rules of a game, and to the point where they're not actually enjoying focusing on the game themselves. So what's the advice around this for our panel?
Prue, do you want to address that, or do you want me to from a coach's point of view?
You're welcome to. I'm still processing the question.
Okay. So from a coach's point of view in that situation, I would definitely be using some sort of visual support for that child that's really getting fixated on the rules and other people following them. To have some sort of visual prompt for them to stay on track would be the best way to deal with that.
Yeah, it's really hard on an autism perspective, because when somebody else is not following the rules, you're highly aware of it. It's like there's a spotlight on the rules being broken, and that's all you can process in that moment. So just learning, having support around learning how to your focus to not be on other people but to be on yourself.
Okay, thank you for that answer. We've got some more coming through, and this one is to Kellie, but of course the rest of the panel can chime in if they feel they have an answer for this. So Kellie, the comic strip visual, and those visual strategies that you've outlined. The question is, what strategies do you use to facilitate turn taking with ball skills? And this is from Coralie, who said she's seen this happening so often when someone is continually not given a turn in a game. What strategies might you employ for that?
Honestly, I believe that this all comes down to education and us setting that expectation within the whole group, not just the person with autism. So I think it's really important that everyone who's playing in that game, whether it be your whole class or whether it be your whole sporting group, set the expectation that everyone gets a go of the ball. This is how it's going to be. So set those rules. You know, even when we're integrating someone with autism into a neurotypical environment, it's really important that those children, other children, understand that that means that everybody gets a go too. So I think it comes back to education. We need to be educating people and the other participants that this is how it looks, and we need to be giving other people a turn as well.
Okay, thank you. Another one that's come through, and this is probably for Prue. Prue, how does sport make you feel?
Really good. When I'm able to access it, I just love getting that energy out of my body. I get a lot of build up of energy, and that's from many different things. You know, it can be emotion, it can be just like I'm not self-regulating enough and I need to have sport is a really great way of reminding me to self-regulate, because when I don't do that, the outcome is that I start to have behaviours of concern like headbanging and that kind of thing. So yeah, sport is just a really great self-regulation reminder. And it's also, particularly with Taekwondo, it's also taught me a lot of social skills. And things like, you know, what I'm responsible for. Like when I was a kid, I'm responsible to bring my uniform and my black belt and all these things. That's not my parents' responsibility, it's mine. And to be there on time, so being punctual, because in Taekwondo, when you're late, you have to stand at the side of the dojang and wait to be bowed in, and maybe have to do 100 push-ups. So...
Prue, can I ask a question of you? Do you benefit from having sensory breaks within your sporting time? So if you take time out to have some sort of sensory break, or are you better to incorporate that sensory input into the activity that you're doing?
That was 2 questions.
Sorry, 2 questions. Sorry.
Can you ask the first one?
Now I've forgotten the question.
I think it was sensory breaks. Sensory breaks.
Yeah, sensory breaks.
So that's something that's never been provided for me. I've never been able to access disability sport because I'm very good at masking my autism and hiding it. And so I grew up in the 90s, so it's very different now, where we get our access needs provided. It's like a little red carpet rolls out. Amazing. So I think it would be very, very beneficial to have sensory breaks, especially if someone's talking a lot and explaining things. For me, I find if I can self-regulate, like stim and not look them in the eye, then I'm able to take on more information. But if I need to look at them, then I need to process. There's so much expectation, so much information in their face. And there's, you know, all the details, like there might be lint on the floor and I just want to go and get all the lint off the floor because my mind will just get really detailed. But if I can just have a fidget by design object to focus on, and then I'll be able to process the content more easily. Or if I have too much energy and I need to sit still, that might not be a possibility.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you, Prue.
Kellie, did you have part 2 of your question?
No, I think she answered it actually.
Okay,
in that.
that's fine.
I think she
Okay.
answered it in that.
Prue, this is another one for you, and see how we haven't prepped you with any questions, so just see how you go. But you saw both Tenpin Bowling and Kellie with her AAA Sports Ballarat. They had some visual.
Oh yeah, Kellie, are you a Doggies fan?
Yes, I am. I used to work for the Doggies. Are you a Doggies fan, Prue?
I love the Doggies. And I went to a school that was sponsored by the Doggies, Spirit West in Footscray.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Good old leading the charge for the western suburbs of Melbourne. Prue, in your sport, have you been exposed or used some of the visual prompts to help you engage in the sport?
I haven't very much until recently. I'm 30 now, so I'm a little bit old for these resources to exist for me. But things that do really help me are like chunking information. So it's things like and visual. So maybe sometimes in Taekwondo, they'll say, run to the end of the hall, do 5 push-ups, run back, tag your partner. And that's got 4 parts in that instruction. And I might process the first and the last bit and miss the middle bit. So if I can get told each instruction one at a time, and maybe I'm the example or see a visual example. So I get told, run to the end of the hall, and I physically run there, do 5 push-ups, and I do it. Then I've lived it. It's in my body, and then I can, it's easier.
Yeah. Okay. And so would you, as a junior, like a young person within, say, a PE class or a sport program, would you suggest that they would be helpful for a person with autism to make them feel comfortable in those programs and follow the instructions?
I think social scripts are really helpful because you can have anywhere from 5 minutes to 3 months to process what the environment is and what your expectations are. And so it really is like how, depending on how your processing is at that moment in your life, because, that processing changes. Maybe you got at school, you got a substitute teacher, like your teacher went on long service leave, or you've gone from grade 6 to year 7. There are some big changes there. So there are already, or maybe like there are roadworks, and like at Amaze, we always talk about if there are roadworks between home and the school, then the autistic students will probably have more trouble at school. Because that the way that the car goes from A to B is different. So it's not as, Did I answer that question?
Yes, yes, you did.
And I think too, Sarah, it's important to remember that, as a child in primary school, they're probably still learning about their disability and how to process that information and what stimming means for them and how they process that. Whereas, Prue articulates it so beautifully, so she probably doesn't need those sorts of resources now because she's learned other strategies to be able to help her to do that.
Yeah. And the other thing I would add is about masking as well, because particularly autistic women and girls, and when I say autistic women and girls, I always have to remember that autistic people are 7 times more likely to be gender non-conforming. But with autistic women and girls, they tend to be more better at masking their autism. So using majority of our brain capacity to hide our autism is something that can happen at a very young age, particularly during primary school. So it could be that they're actually using their capacity for other things. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good point. We do have a question coming through, and again, Prue, it's for you. You're in hot demand today. In terms of your swimming, how did your coach go about including you in the group and teaching you the skills?
Well, at swimming, I wasn't diagnosed with autism. I had a misdiagnosis of ADHD and put on Ritalin at that age. So, or even before that, I wasn't even diagnosed with that. Again, the 90s, it was fun. But my teacher used to sit outside of the swimming pool, and she would do half her body, like this is how you do backstroke, and she'd do or breaststroke, and she would do the movements half of her body outside of the pool, and that would really help me. And also things like this stroke, say your kicking is double fast, double the quickness or double the speed of your arms, or that your arms go out for 2 seconds and then you hold them beside yourself for 3 seconds. Those small details were the things that I always picked up. But also, like, my processing is, I'm very good at visual things, but when it's oral, not as good. And I need a lot more processing time. So maybe my brother, he was able to pick it up in one lesson. It might take me 3 lessons, but I would be picking up a lot more detail.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So I guess for coaches, they really and teachers need to be mindful of the instructions that they're giving, and perhaps not having too many words to it, and also understanding that someone with autism might actually be taking in every single detail of that instruction.
And also, like, swimming pools are hard because swimming pools tend to echo. Like, there is a huge sensory barrier with swimming pools. There are lots of people speaking and lots of hard surfaces, so it echoes. And the autistic student might not be able to focus on just what you're saying. They might be processing everything everyone in the entire room is saying. So understanding those, the amount that their brain is doing, being conscious of that can be really helpful.
Well, thanks, Prue. We do have one last question, but I think we're running out of time. So Anne C has a question about coexisting conditions and how you teach people with autism and coexisting conditions. But Anne C, I might ask you to reach out to Kellie after the webinar. I'm going to put her details up on screen very shortly, and Kellie might be able to answer that question directly with you.
Absolutely.
Yep. So I will. Where are we here? Just going to share my screen again. So I think we've had some fabulous insight from Prue about how sport has been wonderful to engage in her world, and some explanation and some insight to her sensory sensitivities. And this is one of the topics we will cover in our next webinar. But you know, we've looked at some practical strategies and approaches towards communication and some inclusion modelling. So I've been mesmerised today. My brain is ticking. I've learnt so much. So I'll need to process a lot of that information and watch this recording again. I would like to start the wrap up by showing you this inclusion model image taken from Deakin University's All Play website. And I think this is a good image for clubs and schools to use to start to think about whether they actually are inclusive. And the model describes inclusion as providing equal access and opportunity to all. So unlike integration, which expects people with disability to adapt to the regular environment, inclusion creates an environment that adapts to each person. So if you're starting to think about being a truly inclusive club or developing inclusive curriculum, perhaps this is a good image to reflect upon and a model to which you'd like to strive to achieve. If you would like to access this webinar, I'll just go back. If you'd like to access this webinar, you can do so via SOA Learn. This should be available in about a week's time. So we have a whole stack of resources which we'll upload onto this webinar on SOA Learn. I'll be including the Bowl Patrol review conducted by Vic Sport, as Emily alluded to, and this might be helpful to generate some ideas for your autism inclusion approach within your own particular setting. And the review also includes a great list of organisations who you might look to for potential partners to help you identify, develop and support people with autism in your programs. And one of those partner organisations might be Amaze, who Prue consults for, and this is the peak body for autistic people and their supporters in Victoria. So I recommend getting onto the Amaze website and having a look around and discovering how they could support you.
And they have a hotline.
Tell us about the hotline, Prue.
Amaze have a free hotline that anyone can call about any questions they have. We even have autistic people on our hotline. We've infiltrated Amaze.
And why not? What a great thing to have. If you want to stay connected with what's happening in disability inclusion in sport, get onto the Access for All Abilities newsletter. You can sign up through the AAA Play Facebook page or the website, and this is a free state government funded service that connects people with disabilities to sport and recreation opportunities in their local area, as well as connecting people to events, resources and useful articles. It's a really good website and newsletter to get onto. So our next webinar is around the topic of sensory sensitivities and regulation, and we've marked this for Thursday the 30th of July from 4 p.m. till 5:30, just a bit of a later one so we can catch some of the teachers after class. This will be presented by Taylor Palmer, who's an occupational therapist and inclusion manager at Waverley Gymnastics. We'll have Kellie Tait back with us again to discuss her approaches within AAA Sports Ballarat, but also as a mum of a child with autism. And we will welcome back VFLW player Elise Muller, who's featured in our first and second webinars to share her experiences and stories around her sensory sensitivities and regulation in physical education. You can sign up for this webinar now through Eventbrite. It's active, and I will send you some more information about this in the future. I know some of you have asked where you can reach out to our presenters today. So on your screen, you'll see our email addresses. So if you have a question or you just want to connect to either any of us on the panel, here are our email addresses. And once again, thank you for joining us. We truly hope we are supporting you in your learning journey to support people with autism in your sport, recreation or physical education practice. And we hope to welcome you back to the next webinar.